Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. My name's Dave West. I'm your host and also CEO here at Scrum.org, and I'm really excited to have one of our PSTs on the podcast today, Stefan Wolpers. Is that how you say your surname, Stefan? I always try to avoid saying that. Wolpers, right?
Actually, my family originates from England, so there's a Lord Wolper in the UK. So
that there are. That doesn't mean I can say it though, Stefan, unfortunately. But welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me.
And we're excited to hear your story. So I guess to kick off the podcast, I'd love you to tell me a little bit about your journey here. Introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your journey.
Well, I started with agile product development back in 2006, and as so often, it chose me, not the other way around. So back then, I was asked by the folks of the startups whether I would be their Scrum Master, could be their Scrum Master, because they had trouble talking to the founder, and I thought, like, how hard can this be? You know, I had no clue what Scrum was, and I agreed. And from then on, it got me sucked into the vortex, so to speak, right? And funny thing is, I wasn't aware that there's something like a Scrum guide for years. You know, I thought it would be some sort of magic druid stuff, you know, given from one generation to the other one, but only at full moon and stuff like that. You know? And later I found out there was something like a Scrum guide, and I thought to myself, yeah, makes sense. You know, just write a few things down.
Yeah, it really does. And just for our listeners, Stefan's in Germany. Where in Germany are you, Stefan?
I'm in Berlin, you know, so the most un-German city in Germany, I believe.
Yes, well, just for our listeners, yeah. So you started, you know, in 2006 being forced to do Scrum. Somebody said, "Hang on, we need a Scrum Master. Can you do it?" What was it like? What was your first sort of realization or experience of it that you're like, hey, this is different?
My first impression was, hey, this is common sense. This makes a lot of sense. You know, so if you want to know when something could be available, I mean, you'd ask the people who are building this, right? That don't come up with some fancy Excel-based projection stuff that's never going to work anyway. Just apply the thing that makes most sense to everyone, right? And I was very surprised later on to find out that this is not the standard way that people develop products. And the next job I had was basically project manager in a traditional agency. And the first thing they wanted me to do is create one of these Gantt charts with MS projects. You know, I was dying. You know, it was nightmarish. You know? So I believe it's the application of common sense to complex problems. You know, and life gets so much easier, at least in my experience, if you live up to the idea.
So hang on a minute. You did Scrum before you did a more traditional project management approach to software development.
Yes.
Wow, that must have been an interesting moment of, what do you mean you have to, we don't know what the problem is yet moment, you know, sort of.
Exactly. There were these fancy things like, you know, having these status updates every week. It was a big project for a very well-known automobile manufacturer situated in Stuttgart. And so they came up with these fancy ideas. So what would happen when and why and where? And I thought to myself, like, this is crazy. You know, all you do is you juggle inputs here all the day and try to make sense out of them. You know, there was no sense. That was the catch-22, I believe. You know, so anyway, nightmarish. All I can say. And luckily, after that, I got back into agile in the broader sense, and I never looked back at this Gantt chart thingy. You know, so.
Yeah, that makes I guess it's always good to see how bad it is to really appreciate. But obviously there's a lot of young people that are maybe listening today that maybe have never done a waterfall project and have only ever worked on Scrum. But there are alternatives, and some of them aren't
Yeah.
always enjoyable. So all right, so you're back in the agile fold, as it were, after this moment sort of stage left to do this automotive project in a more traditional way. So then what happened? You know, how did you get from there to where you are today in 2022?
First of all, I moved to Berlin from Hamburg. So I'm originally from Hamburg, and I had my startup here in Berlin. What else would you do in Berlin? And so we're really short on cash, and we stopped the thing, and I needed to get back to work. And another startup approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to become the product owner?" Yeah, and I said, product owner. There was something in Scrum, and I thought, okay, how hard can this be? You're the guy who defines where the product is going. This is what you've been doing the last 2 years, so that'll be fun. Just to find out that Scrum at a fast-growing startup is something completely different than Scrum in a small startup, not to mention in a traditional organization. So it was constant infighting with the founders and very control-oriented, so you need to keep the engineers at their tiptoes because otherwise they're ripping you off. You pay them and they do nothing. They pretend to work while having a smoke in the backyard, and all this stuff and crazy things. And then that thing got bought by Google. That was interesting too. Yet another experience. So that was my journey into the rabbit hole of fast-growing startups here in Berlin. So, I mean, fast growing by 2 people on day 1 and 500 on day 500, right? Something around that scale.
Wow.
And yeah, it's an interesting challenge. What is working with 20 people might not be working with 50 or 100 people. You're constantly changing everything.
But you still keep that heart that is Scrum, right? So that's the great thing about Scrum.
Yes, we were fighting for a tooth and nail. So at a certain point, you have this ideal of, we're spreading Scrum throughout the organization. Everyone will know how this works. We're going to flatten the hierarchy, and everything will be great. But at a certain growth rate of the startup, you just figure out that, okay, maybe we should have a defensive position here and just protect what we already have, because there's so many people coming into the organization. You constantly change everything all over again. Every 3 months, there's a new culture. And by quite substantially driven by the VCs, for example, because as you know, if the organization is growing, you need to have more managerial power, and the venture capitalists always know some people who have a lot of experience, very often from McBoston, and then those folks come in and you're back to Gantt charts, right? And it's crazy. So at the beginning, you're optimistic and more. You have the idea of spreading Scrum throughout the organization and the agile mindset, agile manifestos, or the whole 9 yards, so to speak. And a year into it, or you're just content of defending your little island, your happy little agile island in the sea of waterfall.
So even as a startup, as they grow, they start taking these more industrial, sort of traditional ways.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you think in part it's because of this sort of like, this is how it needs to be done, this is how it's always done, this is how large companies operate? Or do you think it's more because of risk and power and prestige and who the people are and their experiences? What do you think? Why do you think that is?
In my experience, a lot of driven is by the original founding team. Somehow they still are married to their original idea. It's their baby, and they don't want to let go. The problem is that if you're a 20-man person team in total, yes, probably the founder is also the part-time product owner. If you're a 200 person organization, that is ludicrous. You can't do this. It's not going to work. You can't wait for the CEO to attend a sprint review and then never showing up. This is not working. I think this is really a part of that. And so the anxiety to lose control over their baby, that the idea might get watered down, directed to the wrong path or whatnot. I think it's more defensive move. So they believe that they are in more control this way.
So basically, they put in place those status reports, those systems around Scrum to give them a feeling of control and safety. Interesting.
The good ones also count story points, per sprint, and they ask you, "Hey, last time was 21, now it's 17. Couldn't we take on these other 2 stories here?" So more kind of industrial paradigm-driven understanding of how this works.
And just for our listeners, I think Stefan was being a little ironic there about the use of story points.
Yes,
but just in case. Okay, so we've done the startup. It's grown to 500. It got sold to Google, which sounds like a perfect story, by the way. Obviously, the devil's in the detail there, and there's probably many conversations we could have over coffee or whatever. So now I assume that you left that startup. So where next, Stefan?
I did. I wandered a bit around here and there. I checked out a few other startups just to find out they're almost all the same. And then I think 2017 or so, I was hired by a large utility company based in the Ruhr area in Germany here as a Scrum Master. And so I thought, that's an interesting task. I've never been doing this in a large organization. Give it a try. So first project, really successful. We managed to deliver in time and under budget. And by the way, it was an application for the UK colleagues at the time. It was really successful. The follow-up project, not so much. That was really a pain, So it was a well-paid time sink, But I was fiddling my thumbs most of the time because, as so often, if you fall victim to this idea of shareholder value maximization, and you believe that software development, that is not my core business, and then you find out that actually your customers nowadays want to have software, and a lot of software from yourself, so particularly machine learning based stuff, like a prediction of energy consumption based on weather data and etc. And then you think, okay, how am I going to develop this kind of software? And you start hiring a lot of freelancers because you don't have developers. You do not have a reputation for developing cool software, so no one wants to work for you. And the problem if everyone's a freelancer is that the very few people who are on the payroll of the client are basically, how shall I say, more equal than others. Well, Scrum has a very egalitarian team approach, right? So there's no hierarchy, there are no sub roles, no nothing. However, if the folks on the internal payroll decide whether your contract is prolonged or not, guess how the retrospectives are working out,
Yeah.
And with the driving force behind this idea of continuous improvement is it's basically not that expressive, right? So it was really frustrating. It was really frustrating, and then I was remembering that that was autumn 2018 or so. I was there for quite some time. And then I remember that we met in spring 2018 in London. And I was reaching out to you, and I'll ask you when I was very frustrated traveling back to Berlin. And I asked you, okay, do you think I might be PST material?
And I said yes. I mean, you told me some of these stories over coffee, and I said yes. And I think that's, one thing that's unique about our community that I think is really special. Actually, I don't know if it's unique, but it is certainly special about this community, is that the experience, like the story you just told about, when we've got a very flat system. You know, when people are going to be the guy that signs off the timesheet, it makes those sprint reviews and retrospectives a little bit interesting. You know, that you that I think that's a great example of where things can go wrong, and you have to really guard against. And that experience is obviously things that people like you, our PSTs, bring to the classes. Okay, so then you became a PST, and tell me a little bit about your experience as a PST. I think that would be really, really interesting. Why did you become? I mean, obviously you're a little unhappy at this utility thing, but why did you become a PST, and what's been your experience?
The funny thing is that I've offered trainings for a long time. I started doing in back at school, but mainly math and chemistry. I did so at the university, and I like classes. It's fun. Yeah. You know, sharing knowledge, you know, helping people to get better at what they do, you know, preventing them from reinventing the wheel over and over again, you know, so there are easier ways to do that, you know, so you can focus on the real hard things, you know. And I thought to myself, okay, apparently there's so much botched Scrum out there, you know, so some sort of whatever way of how people interpreted Scrum and how it is supposed to be, that you need to do something about this. You know, maybe you have a chance by reaching out to a few people and try to explain to them how this is supposed to work. You know, and why these things are the way they are. Why it is a intentionally incomplete framework, and what we can do, and what are success criteria of the whole framework, and where we need to augment it, and how we could do so, and the importance of self-management, and embracing the idea of product quality, and you know, the camaraderie that is supposed to define the team. You know, we're not leaving anyone behind, but we're not throwing anyone under the bus, right? And that was my original idea. So that's why I said, okay, I need a change. No, I can't do this anymore. And I thought, okay, this is the way to go. You know, I thought, okay, I will give it a try for a year if I can go through the application process, and maybe I will be accepted. And well, it worked.
It did.
So I'm very happy about that.
And you enjoy getting those moments in your classes where people go, oh, that's interesting. That's what is.
Totally. I mean, this is the real reward, right? So these moments of serendipity. So I typically close all my classes with the question, okay, please list 3 things you would like to do next week with your team, and share that with the rest of your classmates. And it's amazing to see what people come up with. And sometimes it's really this serendipitous moment when they say, this is how it's supposed to be. You know, I never knew. Sometimes it's the little small things like, okay, why don't you integrate an anti-product backlog? You know, so some space where you put all the things that you tested and validated, and then the team decides, now we're not going to pursue that. You know, so it's really, really helpful to remember you of the things that you already did. You know, so that's really the magic moment. So the last 15 minutes of every class, I'm really looking forward to that. It's fun, and you get a good understanding whether you manage to put some heretic thoughts into the mind of other people, you know, that they will take back into their own organization, you know. And, you know, so this sneaky way of infiltrating that organization from the intern, you know. So I really like the idea.
That's great. And I love the fact you like that idea of doing that subversive change, as it were. Thank you for your time, Stefan. This is, we could talk for hours. You took me back to London 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, 5 or so years ago. And yeah, that was it was good to meet you there, and it's good to continue to work with you in our community. So thank you for your time. We have Stefan here, one of our PSTs from Berlin, Germany, changing the world one person at a time. Thanks, everybody.